Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Matty B. Dude, I've had a crazy day today. So, starting the stream super late, and I've been a mess. So, who knows how long this show will even go. Went to a swim meet tonight, and super long. I'm exhausted after I already had a nightmare at my house today. Luckily, I was home, and our water heater, the top part just exploded. Like the expander, whatever the hell it's called.
Yuck.
So I'm sitting there and I hear this hissing sound and I'm like, it can't be my coffee. Like I already took the coffee pot off. Why would it be? It was almost like a tea kettle sound. So I go out and there I just see water spraying everywhere. So I spent my afternoon just mopping up water and then outside in the heat. So there was a tennis court by the pool we were at. And there was like a playground there, and someone hit the tennis ball over the court railing. And like, bro, I don't even know the last time I threw like a baseball or tennis ball. So I pick it up, and where the guy is, it's probably like from a third base to first base type throw. And I give the guy a heads up. I'm like, hey, I'm probably not going to get this to you. So to get it over the railing, I'm like, I better put a little bit of juice on this. Little did I know, I whipped it all the way across both tennis courts. Hit the fence on the other side, and they looked at me like I was crazy, and I was like, sorry about that. I was like, man, I can't just, like, I looked at my hand, I was like, I even threw it left-handed because I'm ambidextrous, and I'm like, should I have thrown it right-handed? Like, I don't even know. So I picked up a pine cone that was there, and I'm like, I'm going to see if I can hit the tree over there. I whipped the tree right in the middle. I'm like, well, the accuracy's there. It's just, I got to get the strength down. I thought I was much weaker than what I am at my old advanced age, you know? Now I'm like, that's what people talk about when they get old. They're like, hey, yeah, don't worry, I can still like play sports or whatever. It's like, yeah, but can you? Like, I was half expecting my arm to just like rip off when I threw it. Like, yeah, there goes my tendon, and then I walk around with a bum arm. But I don't know, because you always see those guys like, was it Jamie Moyer pitching in like his 40s? I'm like, yeah, he does that every day. So like, if you're at home and you're like walking, like people need to do physical activity. So that's how I'm going to start off the show. When you get older, make sure you still do like physical activity and athletic stuff. Because if you have to do something on a whim, granted, I didn't have to throw the tennis ball. They hit it back over, and the next time I knew better, I underhanded it. I was like, everyone had stopped on the courts and looked at me when the ball went over, and they're like, let's see what this jackass does again. Is he going to whip it all the way across the court? I'm like, no, I know better. So that's how my day went, Matt. Pretty brutal stuff. So I didn't see any updated news on the NFL. I did see a couple of things, but I didn't even have them up. Did you have anything to talk about?
The only NFL news I saw is that there was an interview where people were trying to get Baker Mayfield to come out and just say what his stance was on everything. And he pretty much just said, well, in order for me to come back to the team, it would take the Browns organization reaching out and trying to initiate, some of those talks. But at this point, he just kind of made it seem like that ship had sailed and that they were going to be going in two completely different directions. I mean, it's pretty much on par with what we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. But it amazes me that they didn't try to maintain that rapport with Baker in the event that the legal situation gets worse, because it does look like they're going to pursue a year-long suspension potentially for Deshaun Watson.
And that's the one thing that I did have, is that they're meeting again tomorrow, of course, on Wednesday. So as soon as the show is recorded, Baker Mayfield has seemed like him and the Browns are both decided to move on. So we'll see where that ends up going. I did have one other random thing that before I forget, because I'll probably forget to bring it up in the final bell. Did you see that Le'Veon Bell is going to box Adrian Peterson?
Yes.
Who do you think would win?
Oh, it's AP.
He's old, though, isn't he?
Look, he already has a history of just beating on people, so it's on him.
All right, I'm not going to argue with that. We'll see if it even comes to fruition, because I feel like we've been hearing a lot of these boxing. And to be honest, that's what I hear when everyone talks about like, hey, baseball's dying, like look at boxing, how it's died. But boxing could have evolved. Like they were really big in the 90s with like Mike Tyson and Holyfield and all those guys. But did they take advantage of it? No, they didn't. They let like the MMA come up with Ken Shamrock and all those guys. And eventually at that point, like I think most people knew who both of them were. Like I would be shocked to find people that didn't know like Ken Shamrock or whatever, right?
Right.
So like you got to be able to evolve. And that's why I hear all these like other football leagues like, oh, they'll never take on the NFL. It's like, never say never. The NFL doesn't really evolve. And if someone put together like a USFL now where they're going to start bidding for like the top players, maybe they would be able to compete. Like the NFL is still old school on streaming. I was just checking, setting up a new TV in my office, which I showed you like last week. And I was setting up like the sports channels, trying to see like which ones had free games. And all I kept seeing on every one, blackout date. It's like if someone came along and put together a sports league, I don't care what the league is, without blackout dates and really took advantage of the internet, I could see that blowing up. Just for that annoyance. My number one topic I wanted to talk about today, the Stanley Cup Finals. Not 4K, at least from ESPN, like that I've seen over the air. They did not have a good camera broadcast, which I've heard as a complaint. We talked about it. The Pac-12's been complaining about ESPN's cameras. I don't know how you can say you're going to broadcast the Stanley Cup and not invest in 4K cameras, right?
Right.
The technology's there. People got to watch Michigan beat Ohio State in 4K last year on Fox. So you can't tell me that Fox Sports, meanwhile they're selling all their other shows and stuff, has enough money to invest in all these 4K cameras. They're not really that expensive. People have 4K. That's like, even like the small DSLRs that people can do like vlogging on and stuff. 4K ones were out like 10 years ago, it seems like, or at least 2014 or so, 8 years. So like ESPN can't upgrade at this point. Is it their transmission equipment from like the stadiums maybe? But that doesn't make sense because the Pac-12 has said like our Pac-12 broadcasts look better than ESPN's. And they've specifically pointed out that they're using like their old satellite type equipment in vans in the parking lot to broadcast some of those games. It's like, is that what they're doing for the Stanley Cup? You would think the NHL would have their own infrastructure with NHL.com where they would say, hey, our sport is pretty crucial to have high definition cameras because you can't see that tiny puck if you don't. Right? Like
doesn't make sense.
It's insane. Like of all the sports that you need high definition for, because you remember in like the 2000s early when they did that, or maybe it was the late 90s, where they did like the highlight on the puck. Wasn't that Fox or ESPN try to do that? Didn't have a name. I can't remember now.
Now I'm drawing a blank. I'm trying to think of what it is.
Of course, I did no research on that before I brought it up on the show. I forgot all about that till now. But that's the one thing that I would just like to see. If you followed the show, my prediction was the Avs. That came true. Someone told me that, just so that I'm aware, after the Braves won the World Series in the 90s, the Yankees won the next one. And the Yankees had a killer record last week when I looked at that, when someone told me that. I haven't looked at an updated one. But if you're looking for a baseball bet, maybe you go Yankees. They have 54 wins, which is the most in the majors. Can't argue with the logic, Matt. It's all coming back 90s. Colorado Avs, Atlanta Braves. Are the Yankees next? They don't have Derek Jeter, but didn't he quit the Marlins or whatever? I don't know. I haven't really kept up with baseball because, let's be honest, it is kind of boring and there's a lot of cheating now. People were mad about the steroids, but they don't care about like the Houston Astros like stealing signs and like doing all their cheating. They're kind of like brushed out aside. No big deal, right? Only if it hurts the bottom line. Only if dudes are like super muscular and like hitting a bunch of home runs and like trying to break records. But now it's like, all right, people are still breaking records. Like you have all these old guys playing. Is Polo's going to play forever? I mean, if you play for 40 years, you have a bunch of time or a bunch of chances to break records. That's all I'm saying. Did you have any comments on the Stanley Cup?
No, just surprised that the ongoing prophecy that you're trying to will all of your teams to win is now coming to fruition.
Hey, I'm just telling you, the Packers will be next. I didn't even realize it till someone told me, and I can't argue with the facts, Matt. If the Packers win next year, that's when you know that it could be real, and then we just have to wait for the Michigan one to come through. Harbaugh's been out there. He's been talking about it, how things are good, everything's great, recruiting, the rankings might be low, but he's been talking to higher recruits this year, he said. And I was like, if that's not a weird pitch to like try to fix something that's broken, I don't know what is. Like, are you complaining about NILs and you're saying like, well, hey, I'm talking to hotter girls, Matt. They might not be going out with me, but I'm definitely talking to hotter girls this year. Like as your New Year's resolution. That's what that reminded me of, like his comment. I'm like, yeah, well, at least you have the confidence to do it, I guess. But your numbers, like the dates and the actual signees, like much lower than before. So I know it's still early though. You got to wait till homecoming week.
But I almost think like when you're looking at recruiting anymore, while it may not show in your final year's stats, I think in this NIL whatever transfer portal era, I almost think that having that rapport though matters, because maybe you initially sign with school A. If you still maintain good relationships with that staff, if they're processing people in and out, that's not to say that you don't hit that recruit a year or two down the road and when they're looking to transfer out. So I mean, if you're building those relationships, if they're unhappy with the place that they're at, or the school that they signed with brings in other athletes that you're getting replaced with, you could end up getting bounced back. So I don't think it's necessarily the potential death sentence that it used to be, where if you're just talking to the girls and you're not actually going out with them, where you're completely lost. You can still get rebound dates thanks to the portal.
That is very true. And I think that is something that's going to be around to kind of see, because like Michigan's been taking a lot of grad school transfers from like higher schools that have, like they always say about like, well, the admissions requirements are so high, like you have to be a grad transfer. And I think you've seen where some people try to transfer that weren't grad students and that it hasn't, like they haven't been able to get admitted with their transfer credits. But with basketball, it's a little bit easier, because if you don't care about getting your degree, who cares if your credits transfer, right? Like if they're going to pay you $1 million and you're going to go anyway and then go to the NBA the next year, what would be the difference? Football is a little bit harder though, because you're expecting to be there for at least 3 years you have to before you're eligible for the draft.
Yeah.
So like that could be like a red shirt, and then 2 years be a redshirt sophomore. If you don't get a 3-year degree to do the grad transfer after that point, it might be moot in football. So if Harbaugh's relying on that, I don't know if it's a good strategy. Plus, some of the guys he has been trying to get from like Stanford and stuff, they've been going to like Alabama anyway. So it's like, all right, what a waste of your time. So you go, get the degree, transfer to the football factory, and come out. But the money's been heating up. I sent you some of the rumors about like Miami throwing like $9 million at recruits. And I think that's only going to be the start. Like it was a 4-star quarterback recruit. And they had like, the rumors were that one of like the NIL collectives were out there. And I thought you might find that article funny. I don't know if you read the whole thing. But they were saying that one of the most disorganized NFL collectives were the Florida Gators. Like they were having a lot of in-bids. Like boosters bidding against each other instead of like working together. And like their thing was like a mess, according to anonymous like recruits.
Well, I think there has to be some truth to that, because they just lost a recruit to Florida State, an offensive lineman, over the weekend, and he let like it showed. He sent his commitment to Florida State, and it showed like where he committed from, and it was like he was in Gainesville on his official visit. So it was like he went through the visit with Florida and was like, "Yeah, this isn't it, and then like committed to Florida State like in the parking lot.
Wait till Florida throws out their hardball graphic about how many hot girls they went out with. That's basically what it reminded me of. But I don't think you really know, because like the Miami's rumored to be throwing all these big deals out. The NCAA is like, hey, we're going to specifically look at Miami. It could be 5 years before they even do anything.
But the funny thing with it is that they said 9. It was rumored that Florida threw 11, and he was like turning 11 mil down to go to Miami.
Well, that's because like I said, they've been disorganized. So like you're getting some people throwing like high numbers out, but it might not seem like a real offer, you know? He might be throwing a backloaded deal where like, oh yeah, if you're a 4-year senior, you'll get the $9 million. But like maybe you're only going to get 20, like a quarter, then a half, and then $1 million, and then like the rest the senior year or something. Because that could be like, I think they've been smart where it seems like it's yearly deals and it's broken up. So if they're throwing him $9 million, it could be like $3 million a year for 3 years or 4 years, whatever it would end up being, which I think is like a smarter way to do it. And I think that's what other schools have been trying to push out. But again, the NCAA has already spoken and said like, you can't offer the deal per school. So like if you're going to offer that deal per year, I mean, it's like an advertising thing though. I don't know how the NCAA can enforce it where if I say, hey, I'm going to give you this much money, you don't play at Miami. And so like I don't have the actual impressions coming from you like with social media or whatever. And then at the next year comes to renew that contract, is it going to be cut? Like, I don't think it's just going to be people just continually giving these kids money. Like, I think a lot of these are going to be cut. And the NCAA was saying, like, it can't be cut because they transfer, which might be one thing. Like, if some guy has proof that on his social media post or something sold, like, 800 shirts or something, then, yeah, he might still keep getting his $2 million even if he transfers to, like, Florida or somewhere, right? But a lot of these kids, how many freshmen come in and immediately make an impact? Not many. So like, are a lot of these deals like per year split up where the person making them are like, there's no way he's going to hit whatever our targets are in terms of endorsements, you know? Like how many big name athletes sign a multi-year endorsement only to have it cut? A lot of them, right?
Yeah.
So
especially if they're speaking out on some of these political views that their sponsors aren't in agreement with.
Well, that's another thing too. The Supreme Court seems to be going scorched earth, and one of the things that they're trying to get rid of is maybe the NCAA and college conferences and stuff, their exemption for taxes, which nothing says recession's coming up. Like, hey, let's just start getting more tax revenue in here because we know we're going to need it, right? So like, let's start hurting our universities. Like, I never understood that. It's like, where can we get more money? We're going to need it.
Because there's no way
down the NCAA.
There's no way that the colleges then in turn increase tuition rates on students.
Oh, you know it's going to be just like a thing, and then they're going to say, well, enrollment dropped like a bazillion %, but we're going to raise tuition, and then it's going to be a never-ending loop, right? So without getting into the political stuff, that's another thing they kind of look for. We'll bring you the sports side of it if it ever comes up. But the key detail to that would be like, if you're cutting the tax exemption, I think they had already cut like booster donations you're not able to write them off for like tickets anymore and things like that, which a big booster would buy like a box or whatever. I really don't think it stops schools from building box seats, right?
I don't think.
So like I don't know if they found other ways to write it off. Like, is it really just hurting the small guys that have to pay for the seat licenses you can't write off anymore as donations? I don't know. I never really looked into it, but this would be much bigger than that. Which brings us to our other big topic of the night, because I really don't have much. The ACC finally losing their divisions. It's been rumored. We've talked about it before. I think the one key thing that came out of this, there were a couple of ACC details. The one thing, too, that I wanted to bring up, I think I sent you, I don't know if it would actually went through, because for being in Raleigh, dude, the cell phone service is so bad outside of the Beltline. Like, I'm 2 minutes out of the Beltline. no cell phone service. So I don't want to see it like an ad from like Verizon showing a completely red map, because I know that's bullshit. Like, what are you talking about? Anytime I go up past the city, I can't get service at all, which is another aside. But I tried to send you something where the North Carolina State budget, not NC State University, but the actual North Carolina State, their budget included $15 million to keep the ACC headquarters in North Carolina, which a lot of people have been complaining about. I don't know where they would move it, right? Keeps the power here. They did put in a thing where you only have to have 4 of the championship games out of 10 in the state to keep that funding, which isn't much, right? So I would think like they didn't name them, but it was like looking for basketball, women's, men's, baseball, and then I think football's already in Charlotte, right?
Yeah.
So if you're having 4 there, now you're opening it up to like maybe having a game down in Tallahassee or somewhere. Like I'm sure they would go to like the Tampa Bay or somewhere not affiliated with a university, but like the Big Ten's kind of been doing that. And I'll be honest, I hate some of the locations for like the Big Ten. Like, hey, we're going to put our football thing here in like Indianapolis, which is kind of in the center. If you start moving it to like New York and like somewhere else, you're going to have no fans. It's one of the things that has separated like the SEC and the Big Ten. If you look at the other conference championship games, empty. Like the Pac-12, didn't they start to do it on campus? And even some of them weren't full. So like having it in a central location, like even the ACC, like some of them, what was that one the Florida State was in? Was it Georgia Tech?
Yeah.
That had the tarp?
I was there.
Tickets were like $5.
I was there.
And that's not even a bad matchup, right? Georgia Tech's not that far from Charlotte.
That was when Paul Johnson was there and they were winning.
Yeah, so it's like insane. So having it move around, I like the on-campus option. It wouldn't fulfill their budget thing, though.
But honestly, I think having it in North Carolina absolutely makes sense. Because when you have your northern Syracuse and Boston College and Pitt schools there, along with your Miami and Florida State and Georgia Tech Southern schools, it's a relative middle ground. And plus, with North Carolina having 4 teams in the conference, to me, I don't see how for your main sports that anyone can really have a major issue. And then you can always use some of those smaller, like less televised programs to split between North and South. However you want to do that.
It's funny that you brought up Florida State's big rival Syracuse there to prove your point. But I will say that it is centralized, and I do like the location here. I mean, it's close to me if I'd ever want to go to a game. But now you can kind of float around like to Pittsburgh at Heinz Field, to Philadelphia, maybe like if Boston College ever was on a run, have some in New England, at their NFL stadium and try to kind of expand it. But personally, I really don't like that anyway, so I really don't care about having it at pro stadiums. Like, I think the Big Ten's been talking about maybe floating it around to like maybe Lambeau, maybe like Detroit. It's like, okay, that's okay. But like if you start throwing it in like the Meadowlands and they're like, where are all the fans? Or like, hey, we need to put one like way out west, really try to help make those other teams that don't make the conference championship game or win it. Like, let's make them feel like they belong, That's not going to make the game more competitive. That's my only point. What do you think of the divisions? Divisions, I guess. Rivals is what are they calling them?
Well, they said that there's primary opponents is how they worded it. That there's 3 that are linked to each school, and I think without trying to penalize one program over another, I think it's about as fair as you could possibly do it. There was, like, you had Pitt that had Boston College, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech. Those were Big East teams that they've played for years and years, and it just makes sense to keep them together. Florida State has typically played Clemson and Miami. Like, they kept those rivalries together, and they added Syracuse. Because the other option was to give Georgia Tech has traditionally been on the schedule for Florida State. But, I mean, I think unless you really have a hard-on for screwing Georgia Tech, I think that's hard to say, yeah, your rivalry games are now Clemson, Florida State, and Louisville, who've been three of the more competitive teams in the conference over the last couple of years.
I had another route, though. They screwed Wake Forest by giving them Virginia Tech when they very easily could have gave Florida State Wake Forest, kept Georgia Tech how it is, and then switched and gave Virginia Tech Syracuse, who they played all the time in the Big East. Because right now, Syracuse and Florida State, is that a game people are going to watch? I would say no. Right? There's no history between them. They're up there. People talk about Syracuse all the time. Syracuse kind of lucked out with Boston College and Pitt. And then did they give them Florida State just to like kind of say, hey, we're always going to knock you down a peg? Hopefully, if Florida State comes back. I just don't see it. Like, I think Florida State and Wake Forest, at least in terms of like the pure ACC, would be a game that you could throw on ESPN2. Do you throw Syracuse, Florida State on ESPN2? That's more of like an ESPNU game. And then they're going to say like, all right, well, which game? Because Wake Forest and Virginia Tech, that's not an ESPN. Wake Forest is getting Duke, Georgia Tech, and Virginia Tech. I don't think any of them many of those matchups belong on ESPN1. If I'm being honest, right?
Well, I mean, when you look at like if we're going to go from a pure which games are going to be on ESPN, Florida State, Miami will get it, depending on how Clemson is.
I'm just saying Florida they should have gave at least one team a matchup worthy of like a history and whatever. And like I think Wake Forest just really got screwed. They didn't get NC State. I understand that. Clemson, Duke, UNC, those are more of NC State's main rivals. So to me, I would have liked to see Wake Forest. They got Duke, they got Georgia Tech. Give them Florida State. Keep it close to the ACC because you already had the dynamics with the Big East, and try to build those back up because some of those they can hype up. You know, ESPN does it. They hype up basketball games during the Big East football games anyway, right? So like if Syracuse is playing. Whatever, who else would they get? Like I said, Virginia Tech wouldn't even be that. But like Florida State, I think you want to try to keep some of those premier games. And like you can't tell me Wake Forest is a hell of a better program than Syracuse. I mean, I think it's an even trade. Well, they could each have an upside, right, but now, they're going to be like
Wake Forest is on a higher uptick. Like Syracuse is just struggling. I think Syracuse is just struggling all around. Like they're so much their basketball program is leaps and bounds better than what they're producing football. I mean, there's the history of the football program, but since they left the Big East, they've just been getting slammed.
Let's see. Wake Forest and Syracuse basically tied all-time series since they joined the ACC. It's 6-win Syracuse, 5 to Wake Forest. Historically, Syracuse is the much better program. Compared to Wake Forest. Recently,
they're kind of like a Michigan program where they were really good in the past, but then recently it's just kind of struggled.
You mean playoff participant last year, Matt?
Oh, that's right. Wear that participant badge.
The Big Ten champs? I don't remember the last time Syracuse won a conference championship. You're talking like maybe if you're bringing up Nebraska or somebody. Notre Dame. Oh, no, I guess Notre Dame didn't win the conference, did they? Still haven't won a conference championship, Matt. That's all I'm saying. They're very close. ACC almost gifted them one. I was nervous there for a bit.
Hey, it's tough to win a conference championship. Ask Miami.
They have some Big East ones they still hang up.
They have 0 since coming to the ACC.
All I'm saying is Wake Forest, not a historically good program. Florida State would have gave them a marquee game that might have helped promote them a little bit. And plus, it would have probably been easier in the long run with Florida State to play them. Florida State kind of got screwed. And it's my fear of what if the Big Ten went this route, because I've been hearing whispers and rumors of like, well, if the Big Ten does this with 3 teams because they're going to copycat, Michigan has to have Ohio State and then they have to have Michigan State. Meanwhile, Ohio State's like, oh, they might get Michigan, but then you got to remember Illinois, that Illabuck trophy, and then possibly Maryland or Rutgers. It's like, what the hell? How are they rivals with Ohio State? Like, you're going to give them an easy matchup? And it's like, well, we don't know if we want to give Ohio State and Penn State a matchup every year. Penn State's unrivaled, remember? Penn State's rivals might be Maryland and Rutgers, and then Michigan State. And so in that scenario, Michigan State and Michigan are both getting screwed because they're playing each other, and then they're going to play the other big powers from the Big East. Big Ten East, I mean. And it's like, how is that fair?
But the way that it would work is the same way that if they're going to copycat it, yes, you have 3 teams that you will play every year. I mean, and for the most part, it's no different than what you're facing now. You're every year you're playing Michigan State and you're playing Ohio State, right?
Yeah, we're in the same division though.
So, but I mean, so realistically, that doesn't change. But then the other thing that changes for you is that the other teams within that you're going to play them 2 times during the 4-year cycle.
Matt,
so you're going to get a home and away.
That's not how the Big Ten works. The Big Ten works on money, and let's be honest. Ohio State might end up getting screwed a little bit just because they also bring in the money like Michigan. But we've seen from the past non-equal crossover games that they've been doing, who has Michigan been crossing over with? Wisconsin, Nebraska. They never have like an extended 8-year series against Northwestern or someone. They're always getting the top. Ohio State, meanwhile, always has, it seems like, one less game because it's kind of like, well, we can't give Ohio State or Wisconsin, like we can't give them Wisconsin because Michigan has them. And we already gave Iowa to Penn State. So I guess Ohio State's going to have to take Purdue. And it's like, how's that even equal? Let alone when Purdue beats them, it's like an extreme embarrassment so bad that they missed the playoffs, right? Like Urban Meyer's year. So it's like, you're not playing them to begin with, so don't try to say, hey, we're going to give you guys 3 rivals, and then, oh, well, I'm sure it's going to be even. Like, it's not going to be even. They're even talking about possibly having Michigan play Minnesota as their 3rd. And meanwhile, Penn State's sitting there possibly getting Rutgers and Maryland. And I've even seen people from Michigan complain because Michigan might get Rutgers as a 3rd. And I'm like, if they have Ohio State and Michigan State, they better get Rutgers. Rutgers would be like their Syracuse to Florida State. Like, they need a team that they can beat up on because you're playing them every year. Plus, they're going to get the marquee crossover game. And if Notre Dame comes back and they do the rivalry games, it's going to be just like the Big Ten ACC basketball challenge. That the top teams are also going to have another big non-conference matchup that they're going to play. And then guess what? Then they're going to have a rematch or play one of the other big teams. Like, I think the Big Ten shooting themselves in the foot if they go that same route. Because, like, realistically, what are you going to do? Like, I don't see Michigan plays Northwestern for a trophy. Why don't they lock in Ohio State, Northwestern, and Minnesota then? Right? Like, do they have to play Michigan State and Ohio State? Like, 2 of the better teams historically in the conference? I don't understand why you would like want to screw each other like that. And yeah, it's an in-state game, but like, does it really matter outside of that? I don't know. And I'm not saying that I think that they should. I just don't know, like, going to 3 crossover games. And I also saw one where they said, and I don't know if the ACC is not doing this, but one of the compromises, Matt, would be that they would flip Michigan State from Michigan to Ohio State every 4 years. Isn't that so dumb? Like, hey, we're going to give you a protected crossover, but we know it's not fair. And we're going to kind of just keep Penn State kind of out there. And we're just going to really screw over our other 3 teams that have been historically the best Big Ten teams by doing a round-robin buddy system. Where it was going to be Rutgers or Michigan State would be the 4-year cycle. It's like, but what if you pick the wrong 4-year cycle?
Well, I think where it balances it out, and I'll use the Big 12 as the example, is that say you hypothetically do what you're saying, okay? And yes, you have your round robin of Ohio State beats Michigan, but Michigan beats Michigan State, and Michigan State beats Ohio State. Like, it's just a weird, like, triangle of teams that beat each other.
And then you get Penn State versus Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game.
Well,
and I'm like, what the hell?
In the two division system, yes, but
when someone laid it out that same scenario would have happened like 2 years ago, where everyone beat each other up, and then you're left with Northwestern still getting in because of the head-to-head between Michigan State, and Ohio State, or something like that.
But
was it 2016 or something? I forget which year it was. But the way it would have worked out is they're not planning on looking at your record. So like Northwestern still would have been like 9-4 overall, but like a 10-2 Michigan or whatever they end up being that year, and 10-2 or maybe 9-3 like Michigan State, both get jumped.
But the ACC right now is basing the ACC championship game now off the conference win percentage of the top two teams.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Northwestern went 9-1 with their candy schedule, or whatever it was, 8-1 that year. And they tied all those other 8-1 teams. Ohio State got the Big Ten championship game. I think that was the year they played, and I could be wrong, but I think it was Northwestern. So Ohio State ended up playing them in this same scenario. Even though Northwestern still was like 9-3 or 9-4 or whatever, the tiebreaker scenario that the ACC put out, if the Big Ten followed it, you still would have had 9-4 Northwestern make the championship game, because they're not looking at overall conference schedule. So you could have a Pitt team that loses to Western Michigan, loses to Penn State, loses to whatever, plays their crossover games against BC, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech. Let's say they draw Duke, Georgia Tech, whoever else, Virginia, and they run through that and go 8-0. You better believe that if Florida State and Clemson are sitting there at both 11-1, Florida State's only loss coming to Clemson. Clemson wins that tiebreaker. They play 8-4 Pitt in the ACC championship game.
But I'm sure that you go down through that list of your tied, because
they're not looking at overall record though.
But there's multiple layers of it though, where they're saying, well, it's within the conference, and then if it's not the conference, it's overall record.
Year. Pitt loses to whatever. They lose to Western Michigan. They go 7-1 in the conference. Last year, Pitt would have still been in. Say if they would have played Penn State or someone in the non-conference instead of playing, who did they end up playing? This is an outdated one. Dang it, ESPN. Who did Pitt play last year? They didn't play anyone in the big non-conference, right? This year they're playing Tennessee and West Virginia, and they play Western Michigan again. Let's say they lose those 3 games and go 7-1 in the ACC again. They'd be sitting there at 8-4, Matt. In that same scenario, they would have been in the ACC championship game playing, maybe it's not Wake Forest, maybe it's NC State or whatever. Like, I think it looks good right now, but you're not looking at the non-conference, and I still think you're going to get some teams where, and I'm not saying like, oh, well, this guy's saying like Michigan's afraid to play. I'm saying because Michigan's historically been good, they're about to get ripped off a few years because let's say they are only losses to Ohio State, which is only losses to West or Michigan State, or if they end up having a Penn State crossover, I think you're going to get some weird years where, hey, here's 12-0 Iowa or whatever. Look at how Michigan just destroyed them last year. Like, there's nothing keeping those other teams that just won the lottery. Let's be honest, Pitt won the lottery, Matt. Their crossovers are Boston College, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, have they even been that solidly good since Mike Vick was there? They got the golden ticket. And so they're going to sit there and they're going to say, thank God, let Florida State and Clemson and Miami beat up on each other with those crossover games. It's looking so good for us. So good. NC State pretty much won too, because they've been beating Duke, splitting with UNC, and in the odd year, upsetting Clemson. If they draw like a bunch of other teams like Syracuse, like, why not?
Clemson had a run recently where they were a powerhouse. I think you're going to see a dynamic shift because it wasn't that far along that Clemson was famous for Clemsoning.
Oh, I remember. I still wait for that to happen. And people still get mad if I say that word down here in the South.
It's going to come back.
They start yelling Deshaun Watson at your face. The
biggest thing that I saw was their defensive coordinator. It was Venables. He was a force. And thank God he's finally gone. I've been waiting for him to leave because I think that stability. Now we're going to see what happens because he was there for so long that I want to see how he does at Oklahoma now, and I want to see like what that program looks like at Clemson now without that stability of having that defensive coordinator. Because the slightest sign of instability, the rest of the conference is going to use that as negative recruiting, and you're going to see some of that power shift.
All I'm saying is the ACC used the term they want more TV marketable games. So you're going to get Pitt playing a modified Coastal where guess what? And as much as you make fun of Miami, they've brought in some talent, much more than Pitt has. And they're going to say, do we really need Pitt Miami? Nah. Let's make Pitt play Duke because no one's watching that game on ESPNU anyway. And Pitt's there and they're like, roll that dice, baby. Give me that lottery pick. Like we can tear through this schedule. And then meanwhile, they're only playing 8 conference games. So like the Big Ten, if they stick with 9, that might even it out a little bit because then you can't have like some of those teams in the West dodge the Big Four. And the Big Four I'm talking about is Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, right? So like you could hypothetically be in Iowa and in this modified thing, if they get gifted a crossover game, I'll pick on Iowa. Let's say Iowa gets gifted Nebraska, Northwestern, and Illinois or something. Because, of course, Wisconsin has to play Minnesota and Wisconsin has to play some other teams when they weren't in Iowa's division. Hell, Iowa could even have Minnesota, Nebraska, and Northwestern or something. You can't tell me that if they get lucky and get a rotation with Indiana, Illinois, Rutgers, Maryland, that they don't go 8-0 that year.
Okay. Maybe they do get that.
And they're like, wow, that's great for them. Or Minnesota.
But then what does that next cycle look like? Where they have all of the top layers and they win 3 games.
I don't think they're redoing the conferences based on that. I think what they're doing is just cycling through the teams based on TV marketability or whatever the ACC said. So all they're saying is the top 2 teams are going to play for the conference championship. And the other 10 teams cycle through 2 times during a 4-year cycle, home and away. You don't know what that cycle is going to look like.
No, but you can't tell me that you're not, as a conference, you're not going to try to cherry pick some of those teams. Like, and I'll just, for the sake of conversation, I'll say Clemson, Florida State, and Pitt, the 3 teams who've relatively recently won the conference. Okay.
All right.
You mean to tell me that regardless of who they have, so I mean with Pitt, with Boston College, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech, that they're going to be like, let's continue to find the rest to round out their conference schedule. We're only going to give them, say, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech. Like we're going to find the other ones that are not winning to make sure that they're marketable enough to get to does the playoff matter more?
Hey, if I'm Pitt, I'm saying, hey, you know what, ACC, I hate to really call you guys on this, but gas prices are really high. And I think we should just stick with regional teams like the closest to us, like Boston College and Syracuse, and make sure we have both Virginias on there, Virginia and Virginia Tech. Maybe put Louisville on there. They've been kind of good, but they haven't been that good. And then like Duke and Wake Forest, I think those are the closest teams to us. And the ACC says, so, damn, that makes a lot of sense, Pitt. We're going to have to do that. And then they go through, and they have that set up as one of their years, Matt.
I mean,
it's plausible. We don't know until they put it out there. All I'm saying is you get some of these teams from the South, they're already guaranteed to play each other. If they come and say, hey, Florida State, you're playing Clemson and Miami, do you want to play Pitt too? They're going to say, they just won the conference. Are you kidding me? And then Pitt's like, yeah, we don't really want to play them either. And they're like, okay, that's fair. We'll give you Virginia. And Pitt has to be licking their chops. That's all I'm saying. Because they won the lottery with the guaranteed. It might not happen because it rotates every 4 years or whatever they're saying. So 2 times they're going to cycle through. So you could have every other year be Pitt's year. And you see the Pat signal go up. And everyone's like, this is it, baby. Because we don't know is it going to be a continual like switch, or are they going to switch them every 4 years? We don't know.
Because I can understand from where you're at from a Big Ten perspective of wanting to cherry pick Ohio State, because they've been the team over the last 2 decades that has been the team representing the Big Ten. So like, I can understand, like, we want to make it as easy of a path for them as possible, because when they make their deep playoff run, we want to reap the benefits and we want to ride their coattails. Like, I can totally understand that. Like, but I just don't see, there's not a team in the ACC that you can say, oh yeah, if this team in the ACC makes it out, they're definitely going to go all the way. Like, you just don't have that team. So I don't think that, like, by seeing what the ACC does, I don't know that it still follows some of the Big Ten logic, because the Big Ten, the way that their money structure seems to happen, where they're with the revenue sharing, it makes more sense for them that they can be a Penn State, that they're just happy to go to a New Year's Day bowl and they can cheer on Ohio State when they go to the playoffs and lose 3 or 4 games and just be like, well, we were in them. We were close, and everyone's not getting in trouble, and they're going to class. Like, that's what Penn State cares about. Well, they're not there to push for the playoffs. Well,
people also care about where the statue is, Matt, because they tried to put that into one of their bills, didn't they?
They did. And
I don't know. I'm not in Pennsylvania, so I don't know all the details.
They try to, which I don't even know. Like, how much time do you have on your hands? You're like, where's that statue hidden? We want to make sure that it never comes back out.
I thought they wanted to know where it was so that they could honor it. So, like, people could come and, like, throw stuff out there, right?
But not only did it not pass, but it failed, like, absolutely to the highest degree possible. I think it was only, like, 30 people that voted for it.
So, well, going back to my thing, I think, so, like, looking at the Big Ten rivalries, I don't think it's just Michigan getting screwed. Like, on their list of rivals, Ohio State's main 3, the only 3 that they actually list are Michigan, Illinois, and Purdue for some reason. So, like, they're getting easy. Iowa actually lists Wisconsin. So Wisconsin's going to pretty much be screwed in the West, because they're going to probably get Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota, 3 of, like, the tougher teams in the West. And if Purdue doesn't get Ohio State because they give them, Maryland or something, how does Purdue not make out like bandits? They're going to be basically the Pitt if they get Illinois, Indiana, and whatever other random team they decide to give them, Northwestern or something. Like, that's basically saying, Wisconsin, we know you've been pretty good the past couple years, but now you have no chance, guys. Like, I mean, you might run through your rivals, but, like, your rivals are actually pretty good. Like, Iowa, I mean, Iowa beats them not all the time, but, like, they beat them sometimes, like every 4 years or so, right?
But here's another logjam for you, because I think the ACC and the Big Ten are very similar in the way that you have to win it all. Like, you have to just, well, you have to go the distance. So I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right in the sense that one team may have an easier path than another, but just because you're going to be gifted 3 cupcakes doesn't mean that 4th team isn't going to be Ohio State or Michigan or Wisconsin or Michigan State that on any given Saturday can beat you. And so let's just hypothetically say that it's Iowa or it's Purdue, and you're mowing down your conference slate. That doesn't mean that come November you lay an egg, and guess what happens? You're on the bubble of not making the playoffs.
So I'm going to flip it for you here, because the other side of it is, if you look at the divisions, right? the Atlantic Division won the ACC championship most years. The only years that they didn't were Virginia Tech 3 times, Georgia Tech once, and Pitt once. So you had that team where it was either Florida State or, like lately, it's been Clemson in the Ohio State thing. I will throw it out there where Ohio State's been lucky. I think the no divisions definitely hurts them, right? Because how many times were they down to the wire with Michigan, down to the wire with Penn State, and they lucked out. They only had to play them once. You know how tough it is to beat the same team twice? Look at Alabama that manhandled Georgia, had some injuries, and then couldn't do anything in the national championship game, right? So, like, you can't tell me that some of those, like, on the win streak against Michigan, like, if there has been a couple years, maybe like 2 or 3, where they would have had to play them again on a neutral site, not at home. Because for a while, it seemed like every time Michigan had a chance to beat them, it was always in the shoe. And like Penn State, right? The same thing. Then they have like their or did they beat them on the road? I can't remember now. But like Penn State's losing by 1 point in the shoe. If they have a rematch match in a neutral site, do you think Ohio State's comfortable with that game? So I think you have more of a target where you had one team that kind of lucked out where they didn't have to play the next best team in the conference again. And if you're going to give them a rivalry game, all I'm saying is it doesn't have to be completely even, but I want to see something that's more consistent. Like I would like to see the ACC. I wish they would have went with 2. You don't need 3 protected games. You can have 2 because then it gives you the extra flexibility. And maybe they went with 3 because did that give them a perfect 4-year cycle? I thought the rumor was to go with 2 because they were still trying to get Notre Dame in. And throwing Notre Dame in could throw a wrench in it because I guarantee Notre Dame would want Pitt. Right?
I mean, but I don't think that they would get Notre Dame to commit because they have to be tooth and nail fighting unless it's a pandemic year. Yeah,
that would be a horrendous situation for me if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten and then the 3 crossover games become Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Ohio State. And Penn State sitting there with their rubbing their hands saying, Rutgers and Maryland, baby. Rutgers and Maryland, and I think we should add Syracuse to balance out Notre Dame joining. And the Penn State fans everywhere would be like, we lost to Syracuse again? How are we not in the championship game? But that's all I have. You have any other thoughts on the ACC? I know it probably hits you closer to home.
I mean, I had mixed feelings because on one hand, the current system that they had seemed to be working. I mean, I think the ACC just as a whole is in a tough situation because they're not the SEC, they're not the Big Ten, and just the way that I think the Big Ten structured their media deals and their money with their networking deals so much better that they're making a pile of money for the schools, which helps in recruiting and infrastructure and all that stuff. And they're not the SEC that's just so talent rich with the athletes coming through that they can say, even from the lower level schools, that they're still attracting higher levels of talent because of that. It's like they're stuck in a no man's land because the conference was held in place for years by Florida State, and now with them sliding, like Clemson picked the slack, but now I think Clemson's showing some signs of wear that, like, if they don't, is there enough stability to keep it together? And I don't think that it's there.
So this is going to be my final bell. The rumors down here, they still think, and I don't think this will ever happen, they think that the ACC and the SEC are still going to merge, which goes against everything the TV deals are for. Like, the ACC already locked up their ESPN deal for like a decade. Like, they're not merging with the Big 12. They just picked the teams that they wanted. They just picked Oklahoma and Texas, right? They weren't merging with them. All those other teams are kind of left behind. If they're not going to merge with the ACC, if they see value, hell, it might be in Florida State. It might be in Miami if they're going to keep throwing money around. But like I brought up Wake Forest, how I felt bad, like they're going to be left out. Do you really think that they're going to bring Wake Forest? No. Maybe they'll bring Virginia or Virginia Tech, but I'm pretty sure they're only going to stick with their thing where they really only want one school from each state. Texas, they already had A&M, but let's be honest, Texas was the prize jewel, right? That's why they might take UNC. Would they take Duke? I don't think they would take the NC State. The only way they would take NC State is if North Carolina and Duke both said no. Or like, no, we're staying in the ACC. And then they said, well, we want a team in North Carolina. How about you, NC State? And if they said no, like, would they go with East Carolina? Or would they just say, no, we don't need North Carolina at that point? I don't think NC State would say no. At least I don't think. Oh God, I would hope that they didn't, because then the entire state could be left behind, right? Like, same with Virginia. Did they go with the academics of Virginia, or did they go with the football history of Virginia Tech? Right? I don't know what would bring them more money, but like, I don't think. Like, do you really think Kentucky's going to say, "Hey, Louisville, come on in"? Like, that was one of the things where the SEC's big thing is like they have a voting block. And now the rumor is that the voting block has been defeated because adding Oklahoma and Texas, because it kind of pissed A&M off, where A&M supposedly had joined the voter block with Georgia and Florida and Kentucky, or Kentucky, where they were blocking Louisville and Georgia Tech and Florida State and Miami and them from joining because they wanted to be the flagship state school, right? I mean, they're basically setting themselves up to be the Ohio State. That's why Ohio State, they're in a gigantic state. They have no rival. The rival's another state that already has another Big Ten school in it, which gives Ohio State the advantage if they take advantage of it, you know? So, like, that's my thing. People down here think the ACC is going to merge. I don't think it will ever happen. I don't see any money value in them saying, like, you know what, we do need to take on all these other schools. Because what are they going to get from it? A weaker schedule? Like, oh yeah, there's that classic Alabama versus Syracuse game we get every 8 years. Awesome. People are going to watch that. That's the whole point of the SEC. You can watch Alabama play on like some competitive games every week. They're not going to be competitive if they're adding in Wake Forest and Syracuse. We just talked about how Florida State doesn't even want to play them, or how I don't want to see Florida State play them. You probably do. Easy win.
You cherry pick like a Florida State and Miami out of the ACC. You cherry pick a Ohio State and Michigan out, and then you just force the NCAA to just dissolve because you have the power players in the system. I mean, outliers are your Southern Cals, your Oregons, your Notre Dames, but
well, that's where the Big Ten, they could still make more money than the SEC. We don't know yet. So if they're still making the most money, I really don't see Ohio State and Michigan leaving. And I don't think that, like, the other big key out there, even the SEC and ESPN had already said it, Notre Dame. I don't see Notre Dame joining the SEC. If the Big Ten somehow picks, and this is what kind of sucks for Florida State, because what if the Big Ten says, hey, Notre Dame, let's bring in your old rival Miami and like USC and Stanford, would you want to join the Big Ten? And they're like, well, yeah, that sounds pretty cool for us. And then the Big Ten kind of has like a all-American shape. I mean, like, look at pro football. Like, they had, like, Tampa Bay, or I guess Tampa Bay's been around for a while, but like they only have a couple teams in the South. Most of the teams are up north. So, like, if you had a college football conference that was kind of like that and you had NIL deals, it doesn't really matter if you're playing a game every year in the South. Your NIL deals will pay for that. That's why I don't know why the Big Ten doesn't use that as a recruiting pitch. Like, hey, we're paying you just like the NFL is going to do. And guess where the NFL teams are located? Right up here in the north, in the Big Ten country. I don't know why you want to play in the SEC. They don't even have any pro teams down there, really. So, like, where do you go from there? So my thing would be, if the Big Ten decides to cherry pick to kind of counteract the Oklahoma and Texas and cut them off, how big would they go? And a same thing, I don't think they're going to merge with the Pac-12. How many teams would they take? Would they take Colorado, Oregon, Washington? Would they take a Utah? And if they took some more teams on the Southeast, like, who would they all take from the ACC? Would they take Miami and Florida State? Or would they just ask Notre Dame who they want? Right?
Well, if they took Notre Dame and Pitt are a national rivalry. So maybe they take Florida State and Pitt.
I think they would take Miami from the Big East, though. That's their big game. The Catholics versus convicts, remember? I think that's who they'd want to play. I think they'd want Miami. They'd probably want
that's exactly who they'd want to take.
And they'd want Boston College. And if they did like a pod thing, I think that would be a pretty kick-ass pod. I mean, Boston College kind of sucks, but like you don't want 4 great teams in it. Like they just want the other Catholic school, right? So why not? Pitt's there. Pitt can play a crossover with Penn State, kind of even them out a little bit. Historically, they're better than Michigan State. Like maybe if they got the influx of Big Ten money and they decided to invest it, I just don't know. That's what we'll be keeping an eye on. I don't have anything else. I know we went longer than I expected, but did you have anything else for the final bell?
Final bell for me this week was that Florida State ended up hiring Link Jarrett to replace Mike Martin Jr. So he was at Notre Dame. Notre Dame made a push for the college baseball, and Jarrett was a former Seminole, and he was a coach that I thought when they released Mike Martin Jr. was a good fit to come home. I just didn't know if they were going to be able to get him back because of how far Notre Dame pushed into the playoffs, and with not having the same amount of recruiting that Florida State has recently had, I'm really hoping that he pushes them over the top here in baseball.
And that's something that could happen. I think Clemson hired Michigan's coach for that same reason. Like, hey, we're going to pay you more, and it's going to be easier to recruit. And, like, I've seen Michigan fans kind of, like, shake your head, but I'm like, if you're going to try to win, like, whatever the cup is where you do all sports, and, like, you're going to go into this NIL thing, it really doesn't matter. Like, your team either has to pay or they don't. But don't pretend like they couldn't pay. You know, like Michigan's gone to the College World Series. When has Clemson done that? Not recently that I'm aware of. So, like, don't say, like, well, Clemson has all this money, there's no way Michigan can outbid them. It's like, no, Michigan brags about all the money they have all the time for NILs and stuff. You actually have to use it. If you don't use it, then it doesn't matter. Like, if Florida State wants to cherry pick Notre Dame's coach, and Notre Dame's like, well, we want to be good at baseball, it's like, well, then pay to keep your coach, you know. He just took you to the World Series. So I know exactly where that's coming from. So hopefully it pays off for Florida State, and then Notre Dame learns from it and says, are we going to invest? Maybe we don't. Who knows? So that's it. Probably doing some more college stuff because I have a feeling in the next coming weeks that other conferences are going to make the same call. And then we'll see what it really looks out to. But I'll be keeping an eye out there because I really want to see what the 4-year schedules really look like. Because I have a hard time thinking that, and then even if like Pitt gets one of like Florida State or Clemson, I really don't think they're going to play both in the same year. But even if they do, that makes it easier. Which year don't they play them? Right? That's the year people buy tickets. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.